Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Dr. Joel Warsh, or some of you may know him as Dr. Joel Gator, a board-certified pediatrician out of Los Angeles, known for his popular parenting content on Instagram. He blends traditional and integrative medicine, focusing on parenting, vaccines, and wellness. He's the author of Between a Shot and a Hard Place and has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and summits across the country. Today, we're going to dive into something that all of you have so many questions on, and that is vaccines. Our goal is to empower you with the information and tools you need to make the best decisions for you and your family. So welcome back to the show, Joel.
Thanks for having me on, and good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So, listeners, he did another podcast with us that was awesome, about parenting tips and taking your kids to the pediatrician and all those fun things. And then I've run into Joel a few times, like at the Kellogg's rally and some other events. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different time. Like, before we're talking about more mainstream stuff. Now vaccines are being talked about.
Exactly. Well, I love it. And my followers have so many questions about vaccines. But before we begin, let's just tell a little bit about yourself. And I love that you have told me this before. You're like, I'm a true MD that is looking at the food we eat and, the sleep and our stress and all these things besides just, medicine. And so maybe tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and your background.
For sure, yeah. So I did all the regular medical training. I'm not against Western medicine at all. I just got a little frustrated with the regular system and medications for everything, not focusing on prevention, watching kids getting sicker and sicker, and that really led me down a path to learning about integrative medicine. Also, when I met my now wife during my training in pediatrics, she's very holistic minded, so really opened up my eyes to a different world. And I've really tried to blend the best of both worlds together. Again, I'm not against modern medicine. I think we have a lot of amazing things, but I think that there's such a lack of focus on our lifestyle and the factors that are affecting our health. And so that's really led me down this path to start talking about integrative medicine and, doing shows and podcasts and all sorts of stuff, because I think it's important to get this information out there. But kind of like we were alluding to before, forever, really, at least for the last 10 years or so, you really couldn't talk about vaccines, which is really unfortunate. I really shied away from talking about it and didn't really talk about it at all because it was just so controversial, which it shouldn't be, but it has always been. I mean, obviously, I talk about it in the office and talk about my patients, but I have just really seen over the last couple of years that people are most interested to talk to me about vaccines. That's why they come to the office. That's why they reach out on social media. And we are at a different time. And, we've been through COVID and people have a little bit different opinion on the establishments and having discussions, and social media is at a different place where not everything is censored anymore. And I think it's important that we have conversations on everything. I'm not against vaccines. In my office, we do everything. We have people that go on a CDC schedule. We have people that go on a slow schedule. We have some people that don't do it. I just believe that we shouldn't force people to do things. I think we should be giving information and we should be helping people make the best decisions that are right for them. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening these days.
I love that so much because I always say, like, let's take the Western medicine and the holistic approach and combine them together because they both have amazing, health benefits and amazing things on each side. So I love that you blend them. And I cannot agree more about talking about vaccines. Like you said, I didn't dare touch even the word because I was getting in trouble for other things during COVID. And so I didn't even dare touch that word. And so now it is nice that we can talk about it a little bit more. And like you said, I'm not anti or pro either. I'm more, let's empower the person to make their own decision for their child because every child is so different. And so I want to talk though about a lot of these. First of all, you just came out with a book. Why did you decide to write a book on vaccines?
I really wanted to have something in the literature that was in the middle, that was balanced, that discussed pros and the cons, benefits versus risks. It was so frustrating as a pediatrician when people ask me questions, and I really didn't have a great resource even to push people to. I mean, it really seems like with vaccine stuff, it's like super pro or super anti. There's really nothing in between. You really get two different worlds when you look at a book. I mean, there are a lot of great books out there, but it's like you're looking at two different products. And you can read a Paul Offit book about hepatitis B, and then you could read Neil Miller book, and it's like you're in the Twilight world. It's like everything's so perfect or everything's so horrible, and that can't be true. It's somewhere in the middle. Everything is nuanced. I'm not just like you said. I'm not pro or anti. I mean, that doesn't even really make sense to me. I'm pro health. I want kids to be
Exactly.
healthy, and I want us to have discussions around what's the best way to get there, and whether that's vaccines, more vaccines, fewer vaccines, different schedule. I mean, I think these are the kind of questions that we need to be asking. Not to say we shouldn't do them, but what is the best, most efficient way to do it? And I think parents have more and more concerns around vaccines because we're doing more and more of them. And it doesn't seem like we can talk about it. And the more that things are censored and have been censored, the more that people are moving away from doing it, and we're seeing that. I mean, we're seeing the highest rates of, um, individuals who don't trust medicine anymore. It was like 70% before the pandemic, now it's 40%. We have the highest rates of kids that are unvaccinated, the highest rates of exemptions, and I think medicine has to take a long, hard look in the mirror and look at what we're doing that's leading to these rates of hesitancy, and if people have questions, we shouldn't be shutting that down those conversations. We should be listening to the concerns and saying, "Okay, well, here's evidence that, discusses those concerns, or we don't really have good evidence on that. Let's put together some research and let's try to see if we can answer some of those questions to help people to feel comfortable if they're going to do a vaccine, to feel comfortable doing it."
Yeah, you're right. There's so much information out there. And so these young new moms, especially, they're just terrified. Like, they're like, we don't know what to do because you read one side and your child's going to die or something if you don't do it. And on the other child or side, they're going to die if they do them. You know what I mean? And so
Right, right.
they are confused. So with your book, do you show the pros of each vaccine and the cons of each vaccine? Or how do you approach that?
Yeah, well, I mean, my general philosophy with the book is the same general philosophy I take in the office, which is I'm not telling you what to do. You will not come out with a specific plan of what you should do that's outside of the CDC schedule. I mean, first of all, I think it's a little bit arrogant to say that I know better than the CDC or something like that. So I think it's reasonable to take what they are saying into account if you live in America, but I also think it's reasonable to have questions. And every book that I have read, and I read most of them or maybe all of them at this point for like vaccine books, they all have a very clear agenda. It's like to get you to get vaccines or to tell you to never do them. And that is not the right way to approach it. I think we need something that provides both sides. Yes, I talk about the diseases and the risks and the pros of the vaccines versus the cons. And then a lot of the book really focuses on the big questions that parents have. So what are the concerns that parents have? And then what do we know about it or what do we not know about it? So it can foster debate. And the goal of the book, if there is a specific goal, is to bring this word vaccine out from the shadows and to open up discussion and debate, because I think that we can only move forward if we have conversations about some of these big looming questions, like the way that the research was done, the safety around vaccines, the long-term complications, autism. I mean, these are the questions that parents have, and we need to put everything on the table and say, here's information that we have, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and let's move forward from there. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. Everything has risks. You have a risk from diseases, you have a risk from getting a vaccine. I mean, that's never going to change, but I think that we can ask questions and try to find where there are risks and really actually dive into these things. And then we could say, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of an increased risk from this ingredient. And maybe we can change that ingredient. Maybe there's a little increased risk from this schedule. Maybe we could change that schedule. There's no way that we have the best vaccine schedule that humanity's ever going to have or the best vaccines that we're ever going to have. I mean, there's no reason why we can't look into this and try to make things better. That should always be our goal.
Right, I agree. And I love that you're saying we all need to be asking questions because the medical side needs to be asking questions and the parents can ask questions. And it's okay to ask questions. I just talked to someone probably 2 weeks ago, and she was so frustrated with her pediatrician because all she did was go in and she wanted to ask some questions about the vaccines. And he got so upset with her. He was like, "This is not the place for you. We vaccinate on the schedule. If you don't want to do the schedule, then you need to not come to this office." And she was like, "Fine, I'm out of this office." And she's looking for a new pediatrician, but I thought that And you hear this from people, and it's just frustrating because all they want they're confused, they just wanna ask some questions. So I love that you're saying we all need to be asking the questions.
Yeah, I do think it's a really frustrating time right now for parents, and I think there's this pushback from doctors, around vaccines, and any sort of questions around it means you're like a skeptic or you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a tinfoil hat wearer, and that's so far from the truth. Parents should have questions about everything. If you're gonna go get a surgery, you're gonna have questions. You wanna weigh the risks and the benefits. You wanna know that your doctor's open to discussing it. There's nothing wrong with that. That should be the way that things are, and unless we see a general pushback to that kind of mentality where it's my way or the highway, I know better than everything, and vaccines are perfect and they're like some, heavenly creation. It's like the best thing. It's a medical product. I mean, it's a tool and it has its purpose, and everybody's different, and there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to have a conversation. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to ask questions, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have a dialogue about these things moving forward because there are risks to getting a vaccine, and you could be the unlucky family who has some sort of genetics or environmental reasons why you don't respond well to a certain vaccine or to all vaccines or whatever it is, and that shouldn't be crazy. These
Right.
parents that like they take their kid in and they have a bad reaction. This is not a parent who's anti-vaccine. It's a parent who actually took their kid to get a vaccine and they had a bad reaction and they don't feel like they're heard. That is not the way that we should move forward. People that feel like they have a reaction, that's important data. We need to figure out why. Why do they have a reaction? What are the genetics? What is the situation? So we can minimize those risks, not to stop vaccinating, but to make sure that we can do it in the safest way because these aren't mutually exclusive things, disease and risk from the vaccines. We want to prevent infection, we want to prevent disease, but we also want to prevent risks and side effects from medical products. And both those things can be true at the exact same time. And it doesn't mean you have to stop doing vaccines if you're worried about side effects. You could be worried about both, and we should be worried about both.
We need more people like you, doing the scientific research and the studies and the data behind all of this, because those are the questions that need to be looked at. So I'm curious though, in your medical training, did you have any training about vaccines?
We had very minimal training about vaccine safety. When you go through med school, You cut you kind well, especially, like, residency when you're learning pediatrics, you're told what the schedule is, like, "Here's the schedule, here's what we do, this is what is effective," and you certainly learn about the diseases, you learn about measles and what symptoms to look for, but you don't really learn about vaccine safety per se, so there really isn't a lot of discussion around that. I mean, you're really not think I didn't think about it until after, you kinda take it as the way that it is, and you're told this is how you do it, and this is the schedule, and that's what we're promoting, and that's what we're doing, and there really is no more thought other than that for the vast majority of doctors.
And so all of your knowledge about it has just been through your own research.
It's from my own research and just through the last couple of years. I mean, I think it's really parent discussions and individuals coming to me, learning about it, getting interested in it, and especially during COVID, really getting frustrated with the situation and seeing things that just really didn't make a lot of sense. And taking my own journey, especially over the last year and reading all these books. I mean, even as recently as maybe a year ago, before I really started diving into and if somebody should know, I guess it probably should have been me. This information, I'm an integrative doctor. People are coming to me with vaccine questions, but you really have to go back to the literature and go back through the history, read the books. And I don't know if anyone's even doing that. I don't think most doctors know a lot of this information. I mean, they obviously know about vaccines. They know which vaccines are on the schedule, but they don't know the history of the research. I mean, I certainly didn't, and I think that that's actually really important to know. But really, what pushed me over the edge was just the continual use of the phrase "safe and effective." I think that just made no sense to me. It never did, and I think intelligent people realized that that doesn't make any sense. You can say something safe when you don't have long-term research. You could certainly say it seems like the benefits for this vaccine outweigh the risks that we know right now. It seems like it decreases your risk to the hospital. It seems like it decreases your risk of death. So we are recommending it. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. You could go a third leg. We don't know this, but hopefully not. But at least of what we know, the risks seem to be minimal and the benefits seem to be there. So we're recommending it. That's a reasonable, fair, honest statement as opposed to saying something that's propaganda, which is safe and effective, which isn't actually true because you don't know that fact. And we saw like there were things that came up that we just didn't know about, like myocarditis and effects on menstruation. And you can't expect to know everything when you're doing something at that pace. That's fine. I mean, people understand that there is some inherent risk there, but we need honesty. And I feel like medicine lost a lot of respect and a lot of trust from the general population because it wasn't honest, and that was going on. Natural immunity didn't seem to count, which made no sense because it always counted for every other thing. So there's just all these things that really didn't make a lot of sense during the pandemic, and medicine has a long way to go to get people's trust back. And I think that's really important. I mean, we want to be able to trust the CDC, we want to be able to trust the NIH, and now you have, let's say, like recommendations for the COVID vaccine, right? You still have recommendations for the COVID vaccine on the CDC schedule for kids 6 months and up, but nobody's doing it. Like 10% of people are have given their kids a COVID vaccine this year. Maybe around 25% of adults have done it. So you're talking about a very small proportion of the population listening to what the CDC says. That's a problem. There's a huge disconnect there where either the population is wrong or the CDC is wrong or they're not talking to each other. I don't know what, but like if you have recommendations that few amount of people are doing, there's a clear lack of trust. And that's a problem because it becomes this like boy who cried wolf. What if in a year from now there is some other thing we need to listen to the CDC for? And everyone's like, it's just the CDC. What are they talking about? They don't know. And that's not what we want. We're all on the same team here. We want to be healthy.
Well, do you think part of that distrust is knowing maybe like how the vaccines are being tested and that there isn't long-term studies with this?
I think that's certainly a part of it. I mean, one of the big things that I hear over and over again is parents feel like money is ruling right now. They feel like the companies are not worried about their health. They're not worried about their safety. They're not worried about safety testing these in the best possible way. And they're worried about selling more products. And there is absolutely some truth to that. And I think that parents want to feel like the medical establishment cares about safety and they care about minimizing side effects and risks, but that's not what's happening. Nobody's really pushing back on pharmaceutical companies. They don't have liability for their products, and why are they going to safety test them anymore? Why are they going to continue to look and try to make products safer? They don't have any reason to do that when they can't be sued. So
Yeah.
well, in general market, right, in America, the thing that usually keeps companies honest is the ability to sue them, but we don't have that with pharmaceutical, vaccines, and so the company's not gonna say, "Hey, let me do a 5-year study on this product that's already on the market to see if we can make it better." They can only find problems. We have to have some sort of checks and balances on them to make sure that these products are safe and also to force them to make them better. Always make them better. Always see if there's and there is precedent for that. The rotavirus vaccine, the first one got taken off the market because it was causing intussusception or bowel blockages. The original DTP vaccine was taken off the market because it was causing encephalitis and neurologic complications. And they made safer versions that didn't cause as much of those issues because we were watching these things. We were worried about them, and it just doesn't seem like we're doing that as much anymore.
Well, okay, so how are vaccines tested today then? And why aren't we looking at it more?
The way that most vaccines that are on the market are tested and have been tested are so they certainly go through lots of safety testing before they hit the market. I think that is important to understand, but it's the way that they're done that I think has concerns, and that's things like RFK is talking about, and I think it's really important to be clear. So they're all placebo controlled trial, but the placebo in most of the tests, so it's usually you'd want an inert placebo like salt water, but a lot of the times it's studied against other vaccines or it's studied against the vaccine without the antigen in it. And so you're getting a comparative safety versus vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And oftentimes they're in the setting of them getting all their other vaccines. So for example, the diphtheria tetanus pertussis vaccine, the DTP vaccine. So the new vaccine, the acellular pertussis, it was tested against the old vaccine, the wholesale, but the wholesale was taken off the market. So you can say that it's safe, but you're comparing it to something else. And then you're comparing the old one to the originals, and the original studies were not done in the way that we do things now, so they weren't necessarily blinded or randomized. They were done in, like, the 1930s, 1940s, so it's just a different time, and we're we're saying that we're comparing these things between each other, but you're not getting a baseline of vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And so that is some of the concern. Also, when you're studying a product, number one, the company is the one studying it, right? So they obviously have incentive to show the new product to be as good as possible with the most minimal amount of side effects. And they often study them for not very long, right? You're not necessarily studying your product for 15 years or 10 years. It's usually maybe a few months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year if you're lucky on some of the studies. But long term complications are just that, they're long term. You're not studying that in pre-licensure. You're supposed to pick those things up after, but there aren't really mechanisms that we have that are very good to pick up long-term complications. And so we're in this place where we're trusting the companies to give us good research, and then nobody's really following long-term anything. So it's really, really tough to know what they're doing to us long term.
Well, that's a lot of different complications in the studies of these vaccines. So, are there no vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies then if they're not testing against vaccinated versus unvaccinated?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, that's one of those things that's so crazy that you would think it was done, but it's really not done. I mean, there are ethical concerns around it on some of these things. So, one of the big ethical concerns with vaccines is we have the vaccines, it's a standard of care, it's assumed to protect you against these diseases. And so, the ethics would state that you can't do a trial where you don't give kids the standard, you give them nothing, and then they're potentially exposed to some of these diseases. And so, you're in this weird ethical conundrum where they weren't studied in that way originally. But now, if you want to do a new study, you have to give them the vaccines. So you're not really setting them against unvaccinated kids. And so the question comes back to, if you get no vaccines or if you get fewer vaccines, does that mean your overall health would be better? Or is there some sort of effect on chronic conditions? And we just don't know the answer. I mean, I think we know pretty well that they protect you against the diseases, right? So if you get a measles vaccine, you get good protection against measles. That's not the question. The question is, at what cost? At what risk of side effects do you get from some of these vaccines, if there are? And I don't think we have great answers for that question. And that's a big piece that I think parents are very concerned about, especially in the setting today where we don't see a lot of these diseases anymore, but you do see a lot of chronic disease. You see a lot of asthma and allergies and autism. And that's what parents are bombarded with, not the diseases, which a doctor sees. I mean, a doctor goes to the hospital, they see the worst case scenario, and they're informed by that. Or maybe an older doctor saw diphtheria and they're worried about diphtheria, but no parent is worried about it because they haven't seen it. So it's a different frame of reference, but I think it's really important to understand those two perspectives and where parents are really in a different mind frame than doctors are.
Yeah, and so I'm curious because you're right. I mean, the parents aren't afraid really of the measles. They're afraid of the eczema, the allergies, the asthma, the autism, all these chronic things for, the rest of their lives. And so, ha do we know that vaccines play a role in this? Is it a belief that they play a role in this? Like, why are they being connected?
I We don't know for sure. I mean, I think that's the simple answer. There is some research. I mean, there's a lot of chronic conditions, right? So every kind of chronic condition is different. Some have been studied more than others. Mainstream medicine would say no, they're not connected, but I think there's a lot of concern around it, just given the fact that we have seen the rate of increase in vaccines over the last few decades, and then the rate of increase of some of these conditions. Vaccines are one of the things implicated, certainly not the only thing. Our diet is not great. We're exposed to more toxins. There are many things that need to be considered, but I think that vaccines are a reasonable part of that equation to see if it is affecting a subset, because there certainly is some research that also shows that it can affect chronic conditions. And that's where it goes back to these two kind of bizarro worlds or twilight zone, where if you look at, I don't know, asthma or allergies, which I did in my book. I couldn't go through every chronic condition because there's too many, but I try to pick that one. And you look at one book and it's like, no, no, they have nothing to do with it. And then you look at another book and there is actually, very good studies in reputable journals that show that maybe there is some connection. And so I think that's where it gets really frustrating, because it's really hard to know as a parent what to trust when you see studies on both sides. And unless we actually come together and have discussions about these things and do some prospective trials of vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, we're not going to really know the answer.
Well, and when you've got studies showing, yes, it contributes and no, it doesn't contribute, it makes me question who's funding that study.
Right, right, and that's certainly true. And the whoever's doing the research usually has a bias. But just because you have a bias doesn't mean your study isn't good. So I think that we need more unbiased research, and we need some big trials, and we need to go forward because I think that gets back to wanting gold standard science, wanting things that we can trust, and also for the parents that are skeptical, if they do those kinds of studies and we don't find any difference in the groups, if we don't find that the vaccinated or unvaccinated have any major differences on, say, eczema or allergies or autism or other things like that, then that's going to give them the confidence to do vaccines. Like that's what they're looking for, and that's what they don't have. And I think as opposed to saying that we don't need any more research or we know everything about vaccines, which is really ridiculous because we really just don't have studies that we actually need. We should listen to that and perform these things. We can do it. I mean, we definitely can do some prospective studies. You could certainly do studies where people are unblinded and can choose which group they're in and can choose to get vaccinated or not, depending on what they're going to do, and follow them for the next 20 years. So that's a very doable study. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort, but we can do it, and it should be because it's important.
Well, it makes me think, as a parent, obviously I have 6 kids, and I'm thinking like, "Okay, well, if Big Pharma is, like, funding a lot of this and they're not willing to do a long-term study or a study where they look at allergies or, chronic illnesses, whatever illness it is," then in my mind, I'm like, "Well, they must know that it does contribute to that, therefore they're not putting up the money to show it, because if it didn't, then, like you said, more people would get the vaccine." That's sometimes where my trust issue comes in. So, Big Pharma has a huge role to play in this.
I think that might be right. I mean, the flip side of that is they have no incentive to do it regardless. So they don't they may not know per se, but why would they even try to find out? If you have something that's on the childhood schedule that everyone's basically required to get, then there's no incentive at all if you can't be sued to
Oh,
look at
true.
anything. So I think both are true. I mean, they they may certainly have some concerns around some of the products, but they just have no incentive to do it either way. So either the government has to force them to do it, which is probably still not the best thing. Like I don't think we should put it in their hands to do these kind of studies. I think it needs to be independent, and either that's got to be some government group with a bunch of different researchers that are on all sides of their opinions on vaccines, or maybe wealthy philanthropic people put together a study, and maybe some people that have had vaccinating your kids put together research and get people to donate, and certainly people would volunteer for something like that. I mean, you need billions of dollars, but it's not unheard of that people wouldn't be able to do that. So I think it is something that absolutely must occur. We need to get trust back in medicine. We need to look in these things, and doctors don't want to harm patients. Like it's such a ridiculous thing. If you had good research that said, hey, if you did I don't know, let's just pick an example. Like if you did the chickenpox vaccine at 3 years old versus 1 years old, you would decrease your risk of your kids getting asthma, and you wouldn't increase your risk of getting chickenpox. Of course, doctors would do that, right? I mean, doctors are not trying to give you things to make you have problems. It's just the research, as of what we're taught and what we know, says that they don't, and this is the best research, and we're just told to do it. And I really think that people don't understand the way that research has been done, because I certainly didn't. You talk about things like autism, it's like, oh, the science is settled, that we have all the science, we know exactly how it is. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. We don't have like, any research on all vaccines and autism. We have research on MMR. There's research on thimerosal, the mercury component, but we don't have research on all vaccines. And people just spout that off over and over again. I did. That's what I was taught. And you don't go look at it yourself unless you have to. And I think we things start with um we need to actually get the information out there of what exists. We need a new report. We need to know what the science says today, where the science comes from, so we can move forward. And I hope my book contributes to that a little bit, but it's not a scientific paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that doctors are going to listen to.
Well, your book is going to be incredible because, like I said earlier, every mom out there is so overwhelmed by what to do because on social media, like I said, you hear both sides. And so, I know I'd be running to grab your book if I were still on a vaccination schedule or something or had little kids. And so it's going to be such a huge resource that honestly every mom should get and share with every friend of theirs. But we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But you touched upon autism. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. What is the science or what is the research out there about MMR and autism? or any of the vaccines in autism?
Yeah. So vaccines is obviously controversial, and if you want to go to the tip of the controversy around vaccines, it's autism and vaccines, right?
Right.
And mainstream medicine, mainstream media continually says over and over again, the science is settled, it's been debunked. That's the only things that you hear over and over again. And that's what I was taught and that's what I said. And when you go look at the research, it couldn't be farther from the truth. We just really don't know. We really don't have good research on this topic at all. And there's no way to say it does or it does not. I mean, certainly can't say that vaccines cause autism from the research, but you also don't have research on all vaccines. You have research on MMR. There again, there's no um, double blind control trials. There's no studies that have kids that are completely unvaccinated. You have some studies on MMR. There's some very good studies that are MMR, but most of those studies still it's MMR vaccinated versus MMR unvaccinated kids in the setting of getting their other vaccines. And when you talk about vaccines don't cause autism, you can't possibly say that there's so many other vaccines, and those aren't studied. There's no studies look at the DTaP or uh, Haemophilus or RSV or Hib or all the vaccines together. I mean, you get all sorts of vaccines before you're one, before you get MMR, and yet there aren't studies on that. The reason why people say that vaccines don't cause autism is this circular weird thinking, like nothing proves that vaccines cause autism, so therefore vaccines don't cause autism. But you don't have studies looking at whether they do or they don't. I mean, that's there there's the Institute of Medicine reports that the government looked at in the early 2000s, and they'd say that we don't have enough research. They just have a few studies. Everything you look at just says we don't have research. And people quote these studies that we have to say that all vaccines don't cause autism, and we don't actually know that. We haven't done those studies, and that's why RFK is saying we need to get those studies because it actually doesn't exist. I did a whole literature review to the best of my ability. I have a background in research. I did a master's in epidemiology. I've done a literature review before, so for this section especially, I did a review uh, in the best possible way that I could because when I was going into this, I thought that there was more research out there. I thought that there were studies that showed this, and I was assuming that when I did this chapter, what it was going to show was, look, it's not so cut and dry. Here are the studies that kind of show that there's maybe some question marks around autism and vaccines, but here are all the really great studies that we have that show that vaccines don't cause autism. So the majority of evidence shows this, right? That's what I thought it was going to be and show both sides, but like the majority is going to be pretty good research. We're going to have these great studies, big ones. We've looked at all sorts of data sets. And the reality when you dive into it is it doesn't exist. And I couldn't believe it. Like I had to look everywhere. I read all sorts of books. I read Paul Offit's book and Peter Hotez's book, and these are like pro-vaccine individuals, good books, but they don't say anything different. They talk about MMR or thimerosal, which is the mercury component of vaccines, and thimerosal is not really even in vaccines anymore, so that's not super relevant at this point. But nothing talks about the other vaccines. So everybody parrots this phrase, but they don't actually know. And I guarantee you, doctors don't know because if they saw this and read this themselves, they would also say, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like you can't say this without looking at this. And Aaron Siri is a prominent lawyer in the vaccine world, and he's done a lot of depositions. And one of the really interesting cases, which I transcribed part of it in the book, he was talking to Dr. Edwards, who's one of the head vaccine researchers at Vanderbilt, and he was basically going through her testimony because she was there for an exemption case, I guess. And he was like, okay, so your position on vaccines is that they don't cause autism, right? And she's like, yes, if that's my position. And you would say that MMR is not related to autism. Yes. You would say that polio is not related to autism. Yes. Like she went through all those. And then he was like, okay, do you have a study to show that the DTaP vaccine is not related to autism? No. Do you have a study to show that hepatitis B is not related? No. I don't have a study for, or I don't have a study against. Like the logic is I don't have a study to show it, therefore it's not. Which is very weird thinking. It's just not that's not that's not science. That's just we don't know that it is. And it doesn't mean that it does. It just means you shouldn't say that the science is settled. Like that's a ridiculous statement.
Well, then it makes the parents, though, feel like their child is almost like a lab rat because we don't have the studies for or against it, and so that makes it really nerve-wracking for parents as well.
Of course it does. And everybody hears stories. I mean, you hear it more and more online. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but when you have thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of parents saying the exact same thing, saying they went to get a vaccine, their child changed the day after. I think it's this. Doesn't mean they're right. Just because you get a vaccine this morning, have a heart attack this afternoon, doesn't mean that it's because of the vaccine. It might just happen on the same day. But if a whole bunch of people get a vaccine today and get a heart attack this afternoon, you should surely say, maybe those two things are related. We should look into that. Maybe it's not, but we shouldn't dismiss people, especially people who went to get a vaccine. They're not anti vaccine, they went to get vaccines and they feel like these things are related. That's important evidence. We shouldn't dismiss it. We should look into it. And again, I go back to that's not to stop people from getting vaccines. But if there is something in the vaccines or something that we're doing that's related to this, even in a small subset of kids, don't we owe it to future children to figure that out and make changes? There's no reason that we can't find at some point that these things are related because of aluminum in there or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, and be like, all right, well, maybe let's remove that. Maybe let's lower the dose. Maybe we can minimize the risk. That's not anti-science. That's science. That's pro-health. We're not trying to create autism. We're not trying to create asthma or allergies. We wanna have kids that are protected and healthy, and if they have nothing to do with it, we want the research to show that so people have confidence, say, "Look, I'm getting this. It has no chance that it has anything to do with this. Um, I feel comfortable doing it." That's what you want as a doctor. You're not trying to force people to do things. You want people to do stuff because it protects their kids and because they want to.
Right. 1000% agree. Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Did you know that indoor air quality is often worse than the air outside? One of the easiest ways to improve your home's air quality is by regularly changing your air filters. And that's why I love Filter Time. Filter Time makes high quality air filters in North Carolina, and they deliver them straight to your door exactly when it's time to change them. So there's no forgetting, no guessing, just clean air made simple. If you have an HVAC system, you likely need filters. And these filters trap things like dust, pollen, mold, and pet dander, helping you and your family breathe easier. Filter Time offers 3 levels: allergen preferred and allergen supreme, depending on your needs. And with a subscription, you pick your schedule. When the filter arrives, that's your reminder to swap it out. Filter Time is founded by 2 NASCAR drivers, so you know they don't cut corners. Right now, go to filtertime.com/justingredients and get 20% off your first order, their biggest discount ever, because clean air matters. Now back to the show. So I'm curious because during the time of COVID, all that stuff went on about, oh, there must be a link between vaccines and SIDS because people aren't taking their kids to the pediatrician due to COVID as often. Therefore, SIDS have gone down. And so, is there really any data suggesting there's a correlation between these two?
So SIDS is a tougher one, and it's another very interesting topic because it's obviously very heart-wrenching, have a baby die, and you wanna blame it on something. And vaccines have been something that's been a concern for a while, but the majority of research really doesn't show that there's a good link between vaccines and sudden infant death syndrome. And I think the best evidence of that overall is if you have the general assumption in your mind that because we're doing a lot more vaccines, we have more chronic disease, we have more autism, and you feel like that's the biggest concern. Well, with SIDS, it's the opposite. SIDS rates have gone way down over the last few decades, and especially after we did the Back to Sleep campaign, they really, really, really went down. And so it's hard for me to think that with that, I mean, you'd expect the SIDS rates to have skyrocketed, like some of the other things, if it really truly was mostly vaccines. I mean, I think with everything, we should always question it, and we should always see if there is some sort of subset of kids that are more sensitive. But there is actually decent research on this because it's a little easier to study, and most of it shows that there isn't a good link. And I think that makes sense given the rates have gone down. So potentially, yeah. I mean, I think for everything you can have take Tylenol, have anaphylaxis, and die. So could it be possible for a small subset of kids? Sure, but I think that's less likely than things like chronic disease. So it's interesting because there's a dichotomy there between what's going up and what's going down.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Okay, so I'm curious, why do we have so many more vaccines on the childhood schedule than we did like when I was a child?
There are many reasons, and part of it is I mean, it's good that we have protection for more things, right? I mean, that's good. You don't want to get infections. You want your kids to be protected, but at the same time, there certainly is a question around just because we can have a vaccine, should we? Are there too many vaccines? At what point is it too much? And those are philosophical questions and questions that are really important to be discussing. But I think a big part of it is the fact that we now have no liability. In 1996, the Liability Act was passed for the vaccine manufacturers, and so they don't have liability anymore because they were getting sued so much that they were almost going to go out of business. So they had to stop that and keep the vaccine manufacturers in business. But one of the side effects of that is now they have more push to get things on the market because there's not really a big risk if they can get something on the schedule. They're making billions of dollars, so I think that's a good thing. So it's more than one thing. Obviously, you want to protect against certain diseases, and that part is good. But you have more and more, and that brings up concerns about, are there too many? How many is too many? Is there ever going to be a stopping point? Are we ever going to adjust and take away some things again? I mean, we don't seem to be doing any of that. It just seems to be more, more, more.
Well, and there's no testing of them all together, correct? So you don't know when you add one more to the schedule what that's doing versus all the other ones.
Right. Certainly, some of the studies um, that they are doing with kids for pre-licensure do include some of the other vaccines, but there's absolutely no study that looks at all vaccines, vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, that looks at different schedules, different products. I mean, there are multiple different kinds of vaccines for some of the vaccines. So it's like a mix and match. Whatever you do, it's all fine. There's no difference of risk. It's just do whatever. It's all the same, right? And again, it's like, well, maybe there are combinations that are safer. I don't know. Maybe if you do um, the diphtheria tetanus pertussis with the measles vaccine of one company versus a different, then there's a different side effect profile. I don't know. We're not studying anything like that. It's just like, okay, there's a new vaccine, our pre-licensure studies say it's good on the market. Whichever one's approved, just take it. Do it whenever. And there's not a lot of thought past that about doing it as safe as possible, and really even thinking about risks. And I think that's just a lot of it is around the fact that they just don't want to create any hesitancy at all, and anything that asks questions.
They've created a lot though.
Right, but I think that they feel that whoever the they is, feel that any sort of questions around vaccines create a hesitancy, and so they just don't wanna do it at all, and we know that to be true now after the pandemic. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg explicitly said it. He said the government was pressuring them to take things down that were true, that were creating hesitancy. It didn't matter if it was true. If it created hesitancy, we were told to take it down. And that does not breed trust. That is not
No.
the way to move forward. We need to be able to ask questions, and there needs to be a little bit of trust and respect in the population, that just because we have a question about safety doesn't mean that we're just going to throw away all vaccines or going to stop doing it. But right now, you can't even ask questions. I mean, it seems like a little bit we can now, but it's just percolating a little bit. Like, we're just moving in a direction where maybe we can talk about it a little bit, and that's why I think it's important. That's why I wrote the book. I mean, I think we need to discuss it. I don't have all the answers. I don't know the answers, but I do know that we need to ask questions.
For sure. Okay, so for these new parents that are listening, I kept saying moms, but this is for dads as well. So, new parents that are listening, there's a lot out there on social media about slowing down the schedule, waiting certain amount of months before you do something, not being fully vaccinated till you're 5 rather than 2 or whatever. And so, why are people wanting to slow it down? Just thinking it's too much all at the same time?
Yeah. So, yeah, as a doctor, and certainly, on a podcast, I can't give anyone medical advice. I can't tell people what to do. And even in the practice, I still don't tell people what to do here. We talk about it in the book. I don't say you should do this schedule versus that schedule. I put in some stuff about slow schedule so people can kind of look at it and understand it. The problem is, again, there is no research on this. There's no research to look at, if you slow it down, if you do things in a different way, is that better or worse? It's just personal choice at that point, which is fine. I mean, I think if you are worried that you're doing too many shots on one day, you don't want to do 3 pokes on one day, you just want to do one. Then that's what some people do. They choose to just do one at a time or space it out a little bit more. It's not based on research because there haven't been studies looking at this. We need to do that kind of research. We need to say, hey, if we do one vaccine versus 3, does that decrease your risks? If we do it in this pace versus this pace, does that decrease your risk? It's just more, I think some people use kind of common sense in a way of like, oh, I don't want to give them a bunch of things at once. It decreases their load on their body, and maybe that's better. It's not based on anything specific. There's no magic to say, oh, if we do things at 3, it's better for you. But I think the theory that parents will go with is the fewer they do, the older they are, the stronger their body is, the stronger their immune system is, the more they can handle a vaccine. That may or may not be true, but that's the general theory. And so some people in my office, they do choose to go slow, and maybe they do one on each visit, or maybe they come in a little bit more and they just do one at a time, and they still generally do them all, but just not at the same pace of what is done now on the CDC schedule, which might be like 3 or 4 vaccines in one day. Some people just choose not to do it, and I can't say that's better or worse. It's just what people choose to do.
Okay, so I know someone who actually is talking to the government and stuff saying that it's too much for a 15-pound body, a 20-pound body, that we're giving these injections to those low poundage when it's enough for like a 500-pound body. So, is there any real true data or research on that?
The research and data that we have are the studies that they do pre-licensure for the most part. I mean, certainly there are some post-licensure studies that individuals choose to do, but for the most part, it's just what the companies have done, or things have been changed over time based on the recommendations. So the answer is not that much. The general consensus is that the risks are minimal for kids. I think that it's absolutely not unreasonable to have questions about why we give a certain vaccine at the same dosage to someone who's older versus younger, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous for a baby. It might be safe for both, but it also might not be. I mean, some of the vaccines do have different dosages, so they're not all like that. But I I would just say, very simply, it's not an unreasonable question. It's not unreasonable to ask these kinds of questions. Is the dose too much? Or is the baby too young? Is it too early? Are we giving too many vaccines to a newborn baby? Does that have some sort of long term risk where we can balance that by minimizing some of the vaccines, giving some of them later for things that they don't really have a lot of risk for getting when they're a newborn baby, and maybe you do them when they're 10 or 5 or 7 or something else, and maybe that doesn't increase their risk to get, say, hepatitis B, but they just don't get a vaccine when they're 1 day old, and maybe that has some overall benefits to their health. That's not unreasonable questions. We should be looking at, if we're giving a vaccine to a 1 day old baby, we should have really, really good research to make sure that it doesn't have long term implications, especially for something like hepatitis B, where they really don't have a risk to get it as long as they've been tested. I mean, yes, theoretically, you could bang into a needle or someone can bleed on you or they don't know they have hepatitis B, but that risk is really small. And you can tell people that risk and they can choose to do the vaccine or not. But it's not the same thing as if mom has hepatitis B. Like, there's a very different risk profile if somebody in your family has hepatitis B. Yeah, you don't want your baby to get hepatitis B. That's super dangerous, especially if they're a baby. And if I had hepatitis B, I'd want my baby to have hepatitis B vaccine. But if I've been tested and I don't have hepatitis B, then it is really reasonable to have a discussion about the pros versus the cons and to say, hey, the benefit here is quite small. Okay, what is our risk? And if the risk outweighs the benefit, then maybe this is something we could push back a little bit. And I'm not saying that we should or shouldn't, but that is a reasonable question that a lot of parents have. And especially with that vaccine, it sets the stage for this adversarial relationship with doctors, because a lot of parents are like, it doesn't make any sense. My kid's not having sex. They're not doing drugs. I don't feel like they need hepatitis B. You're trying to push this on me on day one. And now I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust the medical system because this doesn't make any sense. And what about everything else? As opposed to, we have this vaccine. You could do it on day one if you feel like there's a risk. If not, do it later. We don't want you to get hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is very bad. There's a lot of hepatitis B in the world. The vaccine works very well and the rates have gone down. But let's have an open, honest conversation about safety and risk and let people make a decision, not to stop them from getting vaccines, but again, to say, maybe 1 day old baby doesn't need antibiotic ointment, vitamin K, hepatitis B, and now RSV. Like, let's prioritize. What's our priority here? Do we want to make sure they get vitamin K? Let's prioritize that. Maybe they just don't need hepatitis B. Let's get the thing that they need most, and maybe they could do that other thing later. That to me is not an unreasonable thing to recommend. And a lot of parents just do that. I mean, a lot of people don't get hepatitis B on day one. And again, it sets a stage for not listening to the recommendations, which is bad. We want to trust. We want to be doing things together and we want to do things that people respect and trust. And instead of just telling people what to do, I think it's a big mistake on medicine's part.
Yeah, I really love that, and people have gotta just think through it logically, like you're saying, and look at the risks and the benefits. My niece just had a baby, and she came to me like, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Let's talk through each one." And so I started with hepatitis B. I'm like, "Look, you're doing a 12-week maternity stay at home. You're not and then the baby isn't going to daycare. You're figuring it out with family and things to stay at home the baby stay at home. You don't have the risk of taking that baby out." You know what I mean? Like, out and being around a ton of people and at daycare and different things, like, there's not a huge risk for you right now, so maybe that is one that you think about later on. So it is about thinking through your circumstances, your family life, your home life, your work life, whatever, your health and the health of your family and genetics and things before you just rashly make some decision.
Yeah, I just don't know what's wrong with that. It's not that shouldn't be controversial. It just shouldn't be. There's no reason to create a controversy that doesn't need to be there. You're creating a situation around vaccines that's creating more and more hesitancy when we then have things like measles going on. You have measles outbreaks, and then people just don't trust anything. And we need to prioritize the things that are more important and maybe deprioritize some of the things that are a little less important. And these things can change over time. Like for example, again, polio. Nobody wants polio, right? It's not a good disease, but we haven't had polio in America in so long that maybe that's one of those things that we could deprioritize giving to young babies and maybe give it to them a little bit later. Obviously, if polio starts coming back, that would change things, right? But if there's no polio and we don't have any in 50 years, 40 years, then maybe that's one of those things. Okay, well, let's give it to kids when they're 5. Let's give it to them when they're 7. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I just know that we're not talking about that. And people say, well, what's the point to give my kid polio vaccine? What's the point to give my kid hepatitis B vaccine? And you don't have a really good answer other than, well, it's a public health initiative. We don't want people to get it, and we want to make sure that everybody stays polio free and hepatitis B free. But that's not necessarily a good individual choice, especially in the setting where you're getting more and more other vaccines. I think we have to pick and choose and not necessarily think that we can just give kids 50 vaccines and that's totally fine. People are just going to roll up their sleeves and do it. They want to know that they're getting more benefits than risks, that they're protecting their kids from things, and they're doing what they have to do. That's not the conversation right now.
Yeah, that isn't. So, okay, I have a question though for you, a couple more questions. Um, I've seen on social media people saying like, okay, if you're going to choose to vaccinate your baby, then make sure your baby's in its best health before it goes. Like give them probiotics every day for a few weeks before they go. Make sure they don't have a cold or a cough or a fever before they go. Make sure you're feeding them for the toddler, like good wholesome foods throughout their life or whatever, that they're not eating a bunch of ultra processed junk food and things like that. So, do you agree with all of that?
Yeah, I think that's common sense. I
To
think that the
some, to
healthy
some.
well, it should be, right? Yeah, the healthier you are, the better it's gonna be. The healthier you are, the better lifestyle that you live. If you're exposed to a disease, you're gonna have a better chance to do well with it. If you get a vaccine, you're gonna have a better chance to not have a reaction from it. I think that to me is common sense. Um, Unfortunately, there's no research around this, right? We should have research around, well, what are the top 10 things we can do to minimize our risk of having a vaccine side effect, right? What's controversial with that? Should we take vitamin C? Should we take probiotics? Should we do fish oils? Should we make sure our kids are drinking more fluid? I mean, what are the things that would decrease our risk? That I don't know any research around that, but that's completely reasonable research to say if we do these 5 things, you're going to decrease your risk. It's going to make parents more comfortable to do it. So I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing woo woo about saying don't go get a vaccine if you're sick. I mean, obviously you should not. That's not that's within regular medicine. I mean, if your kid's sick, you should wait until after, because obviously your body's dealing with whatever illness. You don't want to also have it to deal with a vaccine too. So I think yes, you should just wait till you're better before you give your kid a vaccine. So that should be standard. I would say. I don't know why you would do I mean, you wouldn't do a surgery if you're sick, right? Like, you don't do anything elective when you're sick. Wait till you're 100% healthy.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good to hear it from you because you never know. Some doctors are like, "No, you can get the, vaccines whenever. It doesn't matter." So it's just nice to hear like, yeah, let's take care of our body and hope our child's body's in its best health as possible before we do this. Um, I do have another question though. So the parents that are listening to this show, yes, they have been encouraged to ask questions, to do their research, but honestly, like Where do they start? Because this is really overwhelming for them.
It is, and I think the first key is, number 1, if you have questions, that's good, right? I think that's good. That's the first place we have to start is you're not a woo-woo crazy parent for having concerns about your child or about asking questions or having some sort of level of concern around injecting your kid with 30 or 40 things. I mean, that is a reasonable thing. You should have questions. You should be thinking about it and you should be looking into it as best as you can. I think it is really important to read multiple sources. Don't just read one book or look at one website. As I said, almost everything has a very different perspective or they're trying to persuade you of something. So make sure you kind of read things on both sides of the aisle to get a perspective. I mean, hopefully my book will go through that for people and kind of have both sides, but even still, you shouldn't just trust me. You should read other things too and just get a general feeling of the landscape for vaccines and then you have some sort of appreciation for what questions or concerns you have. If you don't have a lot of concerns around it, you could just do the CDC schedule. That's fine. That's what's approved. But if you want to do anything else, then I feel like you need to do a little bit of research and ask your doctor some questions. And certainly, if you are going to want to do a slow schedule or anything different, then you really need to choose your pediatrician with that in mind. Like you don't want to go to a medical office where they force you to go on the regular schedule if that's not what you want to do. So don't shy away from asking those questions. If you're pregnant right now and you're interviewing pediatricians, ask them, what's your policy on vaccines? I am feeling like I'm not sure what I want to do yet. I have questions about it. I might want to do a slower schedule. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with working with me? And if they say no, that's not the practice for you. Don't go there. Go to a place where they are, and you may end up doing the regular schedule. You may do a slow schedule. I mean, you'll figure it out as you go, but you should go somewhere where they you at least feel like you can talk to the doctor about the the questions that you have. And on the flip side, if you're someone that's like super, super, super pro vaccine, and you don't want to be around anybody that hasn't been vaccinated, go to a practice where they make sure everybody vaccinates. I think like you have to go where you feel you're going to be comfortable, and everyone's different.
Yeah, I agree. Ask those questions before you even go. You can make the phone call and even ask what their stance is of that
Yeah, of
pediatrician's
course. You, you
office.
you choose your doctor, so go to a place that you want to go to. No doctor is going to take offense if you don't believe in the same kind of system or beliefs that they have. They don't want you as a patient. We have tons of patients. There's no shortage of patients. No doctor wants people that don't want to be there. So you want to have a good relationship with your doctor. You want to be able to ask questions. You want to be somewhere that you feel comfortable being, and that's going to be different. Some people are super anti-vax and don't want to do any vaccines and are very militant. Other people super pro-vax and don't want to be anywhere where there's someone that even uh, thinks about not. There's different people and there are different options, and everyone has a different place to be. Most people are in the middle somewhere, and I think that's a good place to be. With like everything, most things are not extreme. It's in the middle somewhere, and that's where we should be. But you need to know who you are and what you want, and ask questions, and find a doctor that you feel like is going to be respectful of your beliefs. And if that doesn't turn out to be the case, go somewhere else. I mean, you can always switch.
I agree with what you said, but I do have one last final question because a lot of followers ask me this, and I meant to ask you this earlier when we were talking about getting the vaccines. I have a lot of followers that ask me, like, do you have any detox protocols for before a vaccine? Or do you suggest detoxing? Do you suggest bentonite clay on the baby's heels afterwards? Do you suggest a bentonite bath? Do you suggest internal types of detox things? And so I'm sure as a pediatrician, you get asked this as well. And not that you can give medical advice, but what do you say to these parents?
It's a very similar question to what you're asking before about lifestyle and what you should do to have the least risk of having a reaction. And again, we don't know the answer to this. It's ridiculous. Like there is no logical reason that we shouldn't be studying all these supplements and all these herbs in relation to vaccines and seeing if we lower the risk. To me, when parents ask me about this, I always start with, well, let's talk about the basics. And again, go back to common sense. What happens when we're detoxing? What are our main detox pathways? Pee, poop, and sweat, right? So if you're supporting those things, there's no downside to that. Right? If you're giving your kid vaccines and you want to make sure that they're detoxing, make sure they're drinking a lot of fluid so that they're peeing a lot. Make sure they're going to the bathroom. So if they're not pooping a lot, magnesium, something like that is not unreasonable of something to do. If you're not getting outside, like get outside. Make sure they're moving. Make sure they're sweating. This is getting things out of your body. And we know we detoxify a lot of metals and other things through our sweat. So anything that does that, there's really no downside to that. I mean, that's just good for your health in general. So those are logical things to think about. Anything outside of that, there really isn't evidence. So then you go back to, okay, what makes kind of sense for helping you to support your detoxification? Nothing's been studied. You hear things like bentonite clay. You could do it if you want to. Vitamin C is very common. Vitamin D, zinc, dandelion, nettles, turmeric, anything that supports decreasing inflammation, supports your liver, supports detoxification. I think that's not unreasonable. Do you want to give 2-month-old a whole bunch of supplements? No, probably not. Do you have any research to support this? I mean, there's very little research on any of these things for kids, so we don't know. Is there a lot of risk from these things? Probably not. I mean, you probably, if you're going to give a bunch of supplements, you should talk to your doctor about it to make sure that there isn't some specific risk. But if you're making sure they're drinking a little more fluid and getting outside the sun, there's not a lot of risk there. So I think anything has some possible side effects, but these things are pretty minimal. So it's probably not going to harm them to do a little bit of vitamin C or zinc or something like that before, and maybe some magnesium.
Okay, one last question. I keep saying last question, but then you keep bringing something up. Okay, so when we talked about like asthma and allergies and these other chronic health conditions, well, some of them are due to inflammation. So, is there, and you just talked about inflammation, is there any research showing that these vaccines are causing inflammation in the body?
Nothing shows that it's causing it. There's certainly theories. So there are some studies that show a correlation or relationship to it. The majority of them don't, but there absolutely are some studies that do show some sort of relation. And I think it makes sense. I mean, we certainly modern medicine would say there's no biological plausibility to these things, which makes no sense at all because we know that vaccines can cause anaphylaxis. We know that vaccines can cause Guillain-Barré syndrome, peripheral neuropathy. We know that it can cause febrile seizures. We know that it can cause certain things. So there's no logical reason to me to say that for the certain kids in a certain setup, it couldn't push them over the edge and that it couldn't affect their immune system in a weird way because of other things that are going on in their body or because of their genetics. So nothing to me says that it couldn't happen. It's just not definitive with this because we don't have the studies that we would need to really say that. So, I mean, if you didn't do an epidemiology and you want to say something causes it, you have to get really good research. You have to get double-blind control trials. You have to get prospective studies. Otherwise, it's just correlation, and you can get stronger and stronger correlation by getting bigger and bigger and better research studies. But the vast majority of this isn't really ever done because who's studying it? And if you're the most of the researchers are like the CDC, let's say, right, or people that work there, if you're the head of the CDC safety, you're not going to get very far if you start showing that vaccines cause problems, right? So you have a lot of they're not unbiased. I mean, it's not bad, but there's a bias there, and then anybody that shows something, then they're an anti-vaxxer crazy crackpot, and their stuff gets discredited. So there's a big push towards anything that's pro and a big push against anybody to do research that might show anything negative. And so it's really hard to know what's true or not true. But as of right now, the science still shows it doesn't. So I think we need to look at what we know, but I think we also have to be realistic with where we are with our research and why.
I have one more question, Dr. Dole. So many followers will say you didn't ask about this. So one last thing. The heavy metals in the vaccines. A lot of parents are having a problem with that. That's why they're doing these different detox things of these bentonite clays and, different things and worried about the inflammation. So, I what are we doing anything about the heavy metals in these vaccines? Are they a concern? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So it's another big. I mean, all these things are whole chapters in the book. So you're asking good questions, but there are no simple answers to these things. Again, a extraordinarily reasonable concern, right? I think it's absolutely reasonable. You start with lead, right? We talked about lead for years. It was in everything. It was in paint. It was in pipes, and it was totally fine until it wasn't, right? And now we think that lead is not good in anything, and we try to minimize it to nothing. We had mercury, thimerosal, in vaccines for a long time, and then somebody at some point realized, hey, there's actually more mercury in vaccines than are allowable in food, and we know that mercury is toxic at high levels, and it's a different kind of mercury, but still, we're giving kids more mercury than are in vaccines. Maybe that's not good. Maybe we should look at that. And yeah, it goes back to safety research. Like no one thought of this when they were putting it in. They just put it in because it's useful. I mean, it's antibacterial, and so that's what it was used for. But people were like, "Hey, maybe this is not good. Maybe we should take it out." And so they never totally proved that it was a problem, but certainly we know mercury's not great. And so they took it out preemptively, except for the multi-dose flu vaccines. That's the only one it's still in. But now we have aluminum in vaccines, and common wisdom is, well, it's a very small amount and it doesn't cause problems, and that's what's basically believed at this point. But is it unreasonable to be worried that that's similar to all the other metals? I think it's reasonable. I mean, we have upper limits to aluminum. We know that it can cause problems. We know that the EPA has guidelines and the amount of aluminum you can have in water, and there's an amount of aluminum you can breathe in air if you're working in a workspace. So we certainly know there's an upper limit, and if you get above it, then there are safety concerns. The real question is, at the amount that we're giving, does it cause problems? And I don't think, again, it's unreasonable to ask that question, because today we say no, but maybe in 5 years we're going to say yes. And maybe if we get certain research, then we'll show that it actually is a problem. I mean, aluminum is literally there in the vaccines as an adjuvant to stimulate an immune response. It helps the vaccines to work. There isn't any question that it helps the vaccine to work. The question is, at what cost? And right now, it's such a small amount that it can cause an issue. But a parent asking a question, that's not unreasonable based on every other metal and every other thing that we've seen, and every other backtracking we've done on heavy metals, especially. So we don't have the answer right now. It's supposed to be safe. I don't know. I mean, the amount allowed in water is zero point 0.2 milligrams per liter. The amount in hepatitis B vaccine is 0.25 milligrams. So, you know,
Interesting.
it's
Interesting.
it's not an insignificant amount, right? It's not. Now that the flip side of that is, people say, "Well, you're drinking a lot of water. You're not getting a million vaccines." So it's a big difference if you're getting a whole bunch of water over a long time. But still, the point is, the numbers are not like infinitely small. And I think there's obviously a upper limit safety side effect there. So yeah, is it reasonable to ask those questions, not to stop using vaccines, but to say, hey, is this related to anything? And if it is there some other thing we could put in there that's safer? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, and then also that's when the parents need to understand, does their child have a genetic factor that has a hard time detoxing certain ingredients? Because there are genetic factors, where people have little bit of a struggle detoxing. And so that's when parents need to know their kids' health as well. And have they been, I don't know, around like consuming other heavy metals somewhere? You know what I
Well,
mean? That this could be in toxic overload.
and that could be one of the big pieces that are missing. I mean, maybe it is absolutely true that the amount of aluminum in there is not a problem for kids, except for kids that have problems detoxifying. Like, maybe that is true. Like, maybe there are certain kids that can't clear things in a way, and it builds up over time. I don't know. I don't know the answer to these things. I mean, we don't have them. Maybe it has nothing to do with it and it's totally safe. But why is it unreasonable to ask that question? Why is it unreasonable to say, is there a subset of kids that are being harmed by these things? And can we figure out why? And can we reduce that risk?
Right.
No doctor wouldn't want that. There's nobody who doesn't want that. But right now it's like, oh, it's just, we're going to stop doing it if that's the case. That's not true. It's not about stopping it. We want to protect kids, but we also don't want to inflict problems. And if you can't ask these questions, we can't get them to be safer. And that's where we're stuck right now. We have to get unstuck from that.
Wow. RFK needs you on his team. He needs
I
you to
wish.
ask these questions so that the scientists can go study these concerns.
I would love to. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe. I don't know him, so I mean, I've been on his podcast a long time ago, but I haven't spoke to him since. So if he's
Well,
listening out there, call me.
there you go. Well, I have seriously so many more questions, but because of time, we are going to wrap this up. And so I know in your book would probably answer the rest of my questions. So I am going to grab your book. Every parent that is listening to this show, or if you are a grandparent, go tell your kids about this episode so that they can get Dr. Joel's book, because this book is going to answer so many questions for people and help them think through what questions they need to ask their pediatrician and things that they need to think through for their own kids and their kids' health and situation. So, tell them, Dr. Joel, where they can get the book, um, and where they can find you and where they can learn more from you.
Sure. And the best places to start would be Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or you can get the book Between a Shot and a Hard Place anywhere that books are sold, Amazon, or you could go to theshotbook.com and you can grab it through there.
And like I said, you guys, You need to tell every parent you know about this book. And again, thank you so much for being here. I know that was a longer episode than I asked you for, but just so much good information that you have. And I know parents are just going to be soaking this up. So thank you so much. And as you know, before we end, I always ask at the end of my podcast every time what you have found to be the best ingredient in life. And what would you say that is?
I think just family and friends, just spending time and being around the people and, just trying to de-stress as much as possible because the world is crazy and turning off the news sometimes too. That really helps.
Yes, that does. Or maybe even social media at times. I do love that. Family and friends are everything. Without them, life would actually be really miserable. So I do love that that's your favorite ingredient. Again, thank you so much for being here. And you guys go give him a follow and grab that book. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.